All right, welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. I have Chief Velardi from Winthrop Harbor PD in Illinois. He has 30 years experience in law enforcement. Welcome to the show, Chief Velardi. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Excited to be here.
I know, I'm excited too, and I would like if you could maybe just give a little bit of background. 30 years is a long time to be in law enforcement. So for anyone who doesn't know you, how did you get started in this career? Give us a little bit of background on you.
A little bit of background after high school. I served in the military for 6 years. When I got out, I was kind of working at a job I wasn't too crazy about. Really wasn't a good fit. Didn't know what I wanted to do. At that time, my brother was applying for the NYPD, and he was accepted, got hired, and he started telling me about some of the training he was going through and things like that. And it just sounded like an interesting career, something I'd thought about before, but never thought I would be able to do. So he kind of listening to him kind of gave me the push to go ahead and research it. And within a year, I got hired.
And so you were in the military before you started your law enforcement career.
Yes.
I'm curious to know because, obviously wellness has changed so much over even the last 10 years. So I would imagine it looked so different 30 years ago. But I'm really interested to hear your perspective between the military and law enforcement as it pertains to wellness. Did you see any like significant differences in the culture and how they integrated wellness in the military versus law enforcement?
There was really no wellness in the military while I was in. It was a physical fitness test every year, and that was the extent of wellness. The same thing with my law enforcement career when I started. It was more of based on physical fitness and passing a running test and the basic, and that's where wellness kind of ended.
Understood.
There wasn't any kind of counseling, stress debriefing, anything like that there is over the last few years now.
When did you see that shift? Was it in the last 5 years, 10 years? When did you start to see maybe more of an emphasis on wellness?
Probably in the last 10 to 15 years, what began as more of a critical incident stress debriefing was the only things we really had any kind of counseling for after a major critical incident. There would be a debrief, we'd have counselors come in, and that was it. It was one time. If you needed anything further, you'd have to make arrangements on your own for counseling. Um, so it was pretty much limited in the first few years.
Yeah. And how did that, you had 20 years of not really having any resources or emphasis on wellness. How did you see that impact the people around you? And how did that impact you and your personal wellness? Do you have any experiences or insights on that?
I think we were taught from the older guys how to deal with it, and that was basically just shut up, move on to the next call.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of the unhealthy coping mechanisms, drinking, things like that, where the shift would get together after the shift, go out drinking. And that was the way we kind of relieve stress. But looking back now, that's probably one of the worst things you can be doing.
Yeah.
But that was kind of accepted at the time. Now it's a shift towards you need to cope with it, but in a healthy way now, not the unhealthy ways of the past.
Yeah, and I do think that unfortunately, we do still see that in some ways of the unhealthy coping mechanisms, and obviously, alcoholism is one of the top ones, and there's lots of other different ones. And I heard that it used to be called choir practice or
Yes,
the choir boys or something like that. Is
it was choir
the
practice.
choir practice? Okay.
Yes,
Yeah, and now I think that, obviously there's been more of an emphasis on wellness and how can we put in place more healthy coping mechanisms rather than maybe some of the avoidance or the numbing agents that used to be used.
right. The big drawback to that is you've had people like myself in leadership positions now that was kind of ingrained in us on how to, the unhealthy coping mechanisms, and now trying to advocate for other changes that, hey, that's not a healthy way to do it. This is the way the younger officers need to be doing it. It's kind of a hard shift at times. Whereas when you've had guys that have maybe 10 years on that have been brought up with that culture of the counseling is okay, there's no stigma to it, you need to take advantage of it. It might be another 10 years before those officers are in real leadership positions where they can completely make the change.
You brought up a really interesting point, and I'm curious to hear what you think about this because I think across the board, I always hear that. It's like, well, right now we have kind of the older generation that it wasn't that way, and the culture was to, rub dirt on it and keep going. And then you have the younger generation now that's maybe a little bit more open, receptive to it, now has the resources that the older generation didn't. But my question for you is, as a person in leadership who had that ingrained in them, how do you create that open mind and that receptiveness so that you can, from a leadership perspective, be open to providing different resources? What was that journey like for you?
It's still an ongoing journey, and it's kind of, I look back maybe 20 years ago, what would I have done different?
Mm.
And realizing what I was doing at the time was not the best thing to be doing, the best way to cope with everything. And kind of realizing that and talking to a younger version of myself, and then passing that along to the younger officers that these are better ways to deal with things.
Yeah. I really like that statement of talking to a younger version of yourself because I think sometimes we're so hard on ourselves. And if you can say, okay, well, what would I tell younger me? Or what can I do to help the younger generation to be better than I was? And I think that that starts with an incredible amount of self-awareness, to be able to take a look at, okay, maybe this wasn't the best. But I also think that in law enforcement, there's still um, this culture of wanting to leave the profession better than you found it. And I think that if you can have that self-awareness and you can say, okay, these are the things that maybe I didn't do the best. And how can I then be a leader? And I don't think that you have to be the chief to do this. I think there's lots of leaders within the organization that can have that self-awareness and say, hey, as a leader, how can I instill in the younger generation maybe some more positive things so that they can be better than we were and we can leave, quote unquote, leave the profession better than we found it.
Right. And it's more not making the same mistakes that other people have made,
Mhm.
impressing upon them that, hey, we made these mistakes. You don't have to make the same mistakes. Here's a better way to get around it.
Yep.
So trying to get that message out also.
And what are some of those things that you feel like were like quote unquote mistakes or things that maybe you didn't do the best that you're hoping maybe someone who's listening who is younger in their career can learn from?
Um, Reach out. There's a lot more resources than there were, 10, 15 years ago. Um, every department has an employee assistance program, or they should have. There's peer counseling that should be in every department. Um, Even reaching out to some friends is going to help. Um, you really, like I said, going, drinking, doing things like that is not going to solve any problems long term, and it's just going to start a downward spiral. Family is another big thing. Talk to family.
I think that to me, like everything I hear is one, like talk about it, and I think that that's
Mhm.
really hard. It's easier to say than to do, especially like when you're in the thick of things. But I think you're exactly right. It's like the more we can put out that messaging of, how can we make it acceptable and comfortable and accessible for people to talk about it. I think that conversations can save lives. And I think the more comfortable you are talking about things, then the less of a burden you feel like you're carrying when, because I've been there before in my life where I've shoved things down and I didn't tell anyone about it. And it's heavy. It's really hard to not offload that and to feel alone. And so having the ability and creating a culture where it's acceptable and okay to talk about things.
And that's one of the challenges that I'm facing in a small department where you don't have the anonymity of talking to somebody that you might not be working with directly on the same shift. Larger departments, you can talk to somebody on a different shift. You don't have to worry about working with them side by side. But on smaller departments, that option is not there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that we're having to find other resources that officers can contact, and still be anonymous and still have the resource available to them.
Yeah. And I know that a lot of agencies struggle with that. It's like, how do we, and there's a lot of talk about like regionalization or, having some sort of virtual option or, like how can you make it so that you still feel like there are people to go to that maybe aren't necessarily the people that you're with day to day when you
Right,
have such a small, close-knit agency.
right.
I,
And like I,
you what?
no, no, like I said, that's one of the biggest challenges we're facing is how to get around that part of it.
Yeah. And I'm curious because when we talked offline, because in the context of creating culture, because it goes back to everything we were saying, how do you make it acceptable for people to say, hey, like we want to accept some more healthy coping mechanisms. We want to talk about things. We want to, focus on family wellness. I know you mentioned that earlier. We talked a little offline, and I've heard this before. You were an FTO instructor
Yes.
for a large period of time or a long period of time. And from what I understand, FTOs really create the culture within the organization. What are some things that you think can be done to maybe incorporate wellness into the FTO program or get your FTOs on board to start establishing that culture of wellness?
It would begin with the FTOs, and careful selection of the FTOs. That's why that is so important. Somebody may be good at their job, may be able to teach a new officer, but if they don't have the right mindset, they're not going to do as well of a job as they could be doing. And they're putting the younger officer at a disadvantage. So starting with your FTOs, the selection, make sure their wellness is up to where it needs to be, and make that part of training with them. All the FTOs have to go through training before they're allowed to train a recruit. And we need to stress the importance of wellness with them and make sure they pass that along to the recruit officers.
I really like that you said like making sure that there's the right mindset. And I think it's a team effort, and if you have a team that's like on board with these initiatives and setting everyone up for success, I think that that is where you get the buy-in. And that's when you start to break stigmas, when you have that team mentality of like, yes, this is important to all of us.
Well, and that's got to come from the top down also. We can build the best gym. We can mandate that they go to a wellness check-in every year, but that's forcing them to do it. They've got to see that it's voluntary, that it's encouraged from the chief on down, that is the culture that they're trying to reinforce.
Why do you think that there's still a stigma around wellness and seeking out those resources?
When you say wellness, I don't think there's a stigma around wellness. I think more specifically just counseling.
Okay.
I think that's where the stigma comes in. And that might be among the profession that we need to go out there and do everything right. We need to do it the first time, go in, take control. So to go to counseling and give up that control is a big shift, I think, for officers, and why there might be so much resistance to it.
Do you think that there's still this idea that if you go and talk about it, that you're weak? Do you think that that's where that comes from?
I think that still exists, yes. And that's a lot of the military too is like that. Um, where no, you didn't talk about things. Get over it. You've got a job to do. Keep moving forward.
Yeah.
So
How?
that attitude kind of carries over into a lot of things.
Yeah. And my hope is that we can start to shift that perspective of it's actually very strong to recognize that like hey like I want to be the best version of myself and these are the things that I need to do to make sure that I'm operating at my highest level and that I can perform at my highest level and I'm hoping that over time that mentality of like just because you need to talk to someone about all of the stuff that you've gone through in your career doesn't mean that you're weak. It actually means that you're very strong.
No, I agree with that. Unfortunately, the person that needs to be reaching out is usually the last one to see that also.
Mm,
That's where their peer officers should be coming in and talking to them one on one to where, hey, it's okay to talk about it.
yeah.
But I've seen that in a lot of cases too, where, an officer has a drinking problem, a gambling problem, problems at home, and they're the last ones to actually see that there's a problem.
Well, I think it takes an incredible amount of self-awareness. I think that and I'm guilty of this too. Like, and that's the thing about this podcast. Like, I don't want anyone to feel like it's like a point at someone because like I've very many times had to point at myself. And there's been so many times where, and you could even put it in the simplest example of, having an argument with your partner. Like, what tends to happen, right? You're like, you did this, you did that, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And then they point something out in you, and you're like, well, we're not talking about that right now. I'm talking about you. And so I think like it's human nature to do that, to be like, these are all the things that are wrong externally. These are all the things that are wrong with everybody else, and I can try to fix everybody else or complain about everyone else or whatever. And then to have a moment of like, oh,
Mhm.
like maybe I should look at myself and my behavior and my actions and reactions to things and have that level of self-awareness. And I think that it's harder. It's harder to look at yourself than it is to look at everybody else and try to like point out the problems and faults in everybody else. And so I think that that would be the first step to that is maybe having a little bit of a bird's eye view of, okay, these are the things I'm struggling with. These are the things that maybe aren't the best choices for me and my longevity, and what can I do to improve upon that? But yeah, it's tough to look at yourself.
And that's the hard part. I think where a lot of the stigma comes in too, where I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me. I don't need, any help. I don't need to talk about it. And then nothing moves forward from there. It's just like I said, a kind of a downward spiral at that point if they don't reach out.
Yeah, I heard something one time that I really liked, and it's very similar to what you said about the younger version of yourself, and it was like, how would you, like, if you had someone who you really, really cared about, that could be a friend, a family member, a spouse, a child, if they were going through what you were, or if they were doing the things that you were, or not doing the things that you're not doing, what advice would you give to them? And I think sometimes if you can put yourself like into another person and say, if I had someone really near and dear to me that I loved that was struggling in this way and maybe reaching for the bottle or overspending or gambling or whatever, and they weren't helping themselves to get better, what would my piece of advice be to them? Because then I think then you can put it in a different perspective because it's like, oh, well, I would tell them this, this, and this. Like I would tell them to go talk to someone. I would tell them to, maybe start seeking out resources within the organization or whatever it is. But I think if you can put that into like a different context, it can help.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Giving somebody a different view of what they're doing
Yeah.
is one of the best ways to kind of get their attention and bring it to light that maybe they're not dealing with it in the correct way, or these are the consequences if you do. keep going down the road you're going.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's got to be continuous. It can't be a one time, let me mention it to them. Okay. There's got to be a lot of follow up to that, making sure they're on the right path. They know where to get the resources, they're getting them, and they continue with however long they need. A lot of people, it's not going to happen overnight. Some people, it still may continue for months before they finally hit rock bottom and realize, okay, things need to change.
Mhm. How important do you think it is to have, and I know this is a word that's used all the time, but culturally competent people or resources to be able to reach out to? How important do you think that is?
I don't think there's too many things more important than that. Having the resources, but again, having the resources is only one part of the equation.
Yeah.
You've got to let people know that the resources are there, make sure they know how to use them, and a continual reminder and build that culture that we have these resources for you. You need to take advantage of
Mhm.
and keep pushing and build that culture where it's accepted and there's no stigma attached to using the resources that are there.
And I think that like the thing to remember is that if they're not being supported and they're not made available and people aren't using them, then they're not going to help people. And so I think that it's important to remember that the goal is to get people to use the resources so that it benefits the people. So whatever you
Right.
have to do to build that culture and make sure that, they're utilized.
And that's the thing. We don't keep track of who calls up a peer counselor, who uses them.
Yep.
Um, to me, as long as they're being used, that's enough. And I constantly stress to my officers that the resources are there. Use them, take advantage of them. I'm not going to sit there and check off, oh, this officer went to counseling 3 times last month.
Right.
To me and to other leaders, that shouldn't matter who uses them as long as they are being used
Yep.
and they've got the resources they need.
And I know you mentioned some of the resources that you already have. Can you maybe highlight what you guys are doing that's been successful? Because I know you said you're a smaller agency, and there's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who are in the same position. They have a small agency. It's harder in some ways to get resources out there and to have the funding to be able to support it. And if there's anything that you're doing that's successful, it might be of inspiration to other people who are listening.
Right now, we're partnering with the fire department. We are going to build a new gym
Mm.
to encourage the physical part of wellness. When I first got to this agency, I had retired from my first agency in 22. I was retired for about 8 months, and then I was offered the chief's position as an interim chief. And then 6 months after that, it became permanent. There were no peer support officers on the department that had any kind of formal training. So we partnered with some of the other agencies to where we could use their peer support officers, and ours are getting trained next month. So to build on that, um, we kind of have to use a network of peer support officers that they have available to them on an app,
Mm.
so they can call up somebody on the phone anytime, day or night. Somebody will always answer. Um, and that's kind of where we're at now. But like I said, as far as a smaller agency and getting the resources is difficult, and still having the officers feel comfortable using those resources.
Well, I think it's smart to partner. I think that a lot of times, like everyone feels a little siloed and kind of like on their own island. And so the more you can partner to try to, create a bigger network is
Hmm.
helpful. I also think that it's a really good opportunity too. If you guys partner together, you can have competitions between fire and PD. And we know that you guys love to do that. So duke
Yeah,
out for who's the best, you know?
it opens the door to a few more things. But like I've heard from everybody else, money is the issue. So we need to find ways, low cost ways to get around those things. A lot of the counseling is covered by insurance,
Mhm.
things like that. One of the things I would like to build on is a more of a complete wellness program, probably in the next year or so, and have a physical component to that. Um, Counseling, required counseling once a year for every officer. That way, it's just not one officer going, it's everybody has to go. Um, and then kind of build on that from there along with a complete medical every year for every officer.
Yeah.
And those are low cost ways. They're all paid for by insurance. And more officers, especially the young ones, need to take advantage of that. I know when I was that age, you didn't think about going for a physical every year. You're in great shape. Um, but by going once a year for a physical, they can catch any problems early on.
Yeah. And I think you're also like creating a habit. And I think that's the most important thing when it comes to wellness is how can you create the consistency so that it is just a normal, non-negotiable part of your life. And if you wait until you're old like us, and start to I'm throwing myself in that ring. If you wait until you're, older in life and then you start to try, it's so much harder. And you're right. Now maybe you could have had early detection where now you don't. And so I think if you can start as early as possible, and I was the same way. Like I wasn't thinking about that stuff when I was younger. I didn't have anyone telling me to think about that stuff when I was younger either. It was just like you just go and you just assume that you're good. And
Yeah,
maybe
you didn't go unless there was a problem.
exactly. And maybe you are good until you're not good. But I think that if you can have the consistency, just like you would with anything else, like you should probably be going to the dentist twice a year, at least once a year. There's certain things that I think you do over time. You see the eye doctor, you see the dentist. So I think that if you can start that habit of like, this is just what I do every year, then that's going to help create that longevity in the career, like you talked about.
Right.
Um, I I wanted to get your insights because you had said when we were offline, this concept of long range planning. And I think that that goes right in line with what we were just talking about. What is long range planning to you?
To me, the job is going to end one day, whether you retire at 20 years, 30 years, whether you decide at 10 years that the job is not right for you. Eventually, it's going to come to an end. You want to be able to walk out, after a career in pretty much the same shape you walked in.
Mhm.
Um, the job is going to change you, and it's how you deal with that going along that kind of dictates how you're going to leave. So long range planning to me is start planning early, financially, physically, and mentally. And you can make so many small changes that can become part of your daily habit that you wouldn't even notice. And at the end of your career, however long, um, you're in good shape. A lot of younger guys, they're making good money when they come in. Never been taught how to save, how to spend it wisely. And 20 years down the road, when they decide they want to retire, they can't because they don't have any savings built up, no investments, and they end up working a lot longer than they really want to. The same thing with your physical health. A lot of the mid 20s think they're in great shape, don't do anything to maintain that, and at the end of 20 years, your age is going to catch up to you. Um, and as far as the mental aspect too, you can't expect to leave the job the same way with the same thought process you had coming in, from years ago. You're going to see things that, really most people will not see. And how you deal with that and how you cope with that is going to determine, are you going to have an enjoyable retirement or, something after police work? You know? So it's by taking small steps. I mean, even as far as physically, go to the gym a couple of times a week, make that a habit, make it a priority. And a lot of guys, especially when they work second shift and midnight shift, well, the only thing open is fast food places. There's nothing wrong with packing a lunch and bringing it with you to eat during the shift. And you can make healthier choices that way. As soon as you start, get a hold of a financial planner to start planning out long range that you'll be financially able to retire to when you want to, not, to continue working because you have to.
Yeah.
And small changes like that I think you've got a plan for, like I said, one day, you know, you're going to be retired or, decide it's not for you. What's the next step? What do you plan on doing after that?
Yeah, and I think proactive wellness is always the hardest, but I really like that approach of like, hey, listen to us or to you and who's been through it, and like let's start being more proactive about how you can set yourself up for success. And I started this podcast because I can't tell you how many people I would have conversations with who are in leadership who were saying, I wish I would have done this earlier in my career.
Hmm.
I would have listened to someone when they told me to take care of myself. And there's so many people who I talk to who have back pain, chronic back pain, three shoulder surgeries or like double shoulder surgeries, and then divorces or second or third divorces and, PTSD. There's so many things that we know can happen because of this profession, especially over time. So this idea of, hey, don't be that person who's saying, I wish, at least if that does happen to you, you know that you tried to be proactive on the front end, because it's never going to be elimination of all those things, right? Like we're never going to eliminate divorce. We're never going to eliminate shoulder injuries or back pain, but how can you set yourself up so that you're reducing your risk of those things as much as possible? And then when you do get to the end of the career, you can move and you feel good physically, mentally, you
And
hopefully have a family, at the end of it. And,
and that's what I tell the younger officers too. I've had two shoulder surgeries. So I know what that's like. Yeah, and I tell them take care of themselves. They might not think it's important when they first start out. They're excited to do the job. They're, you know, want to go out, do everything. And a lot of it too is I tell them is, they've got to take care of themselves first. They're no good to anybody if they're not in a good frame of mind, either physically, mentally. They're going to cause more issues,
yeah.
in their personal life and with the public that they deal with if they can't, take care of themselves first and be good for themselves first. And a lot of people, they think it's selfish to do that. And getting the message across that no, it's not selfish. Self-care is first.
Mhm.
And then after that, you'll be in a better place to do what you need to do.
I think too, it's like it's all directly related to performance. And a lot of the young guys and girls that are coming into this profession, they're like eager, right? They're bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like excited, want to do the best possible job. And so if that's the goal in the beginning, is like, how can I be the best? And if people want to promote and they want to, rise the ranks, they
Hmm.
want to like get to these certain milestones, then it's like, okay, well, how can you be your best? Well, it starts with being physically and mentally at a peak performance. And so if you can frame it in your mind that way of like, okay, what is my goal? My goal is to be safe and effective on the street. My goal maybe is to promote if someone has that goal. Maybe they want to be a detective and they want to be the best detective ever. Whatever your professional goal is, okay, well, in order to do those things, you have to be at an elite level. And so you have to prioritize your wellness in order to get there. Like there's just no other way that you can be the best at what you do if you're not focusing on being the best physically and mentally. And I think that if we can start to relay that message of like, hey, this is related to performance at home and on the job, then maybe that'll be something people can get on board with a little bit more than it being like this
Hmm.
idea of like, oh, I'm broken, or like, oh, like, now I need to do this because, XYZ. It's like, no, like I got in front of it. I was proactive because I wanted to be the best at what I did. I think that that's a really good message.
Yeah, I think there's only so long you can maintain that, um, that young, I want to go out, do everything without taking care of yourself. You can only do that for so long. And then you really need to sit back and start taking care of yourself.
Yeah.
So that should be, taking care of yourself from day one, to operate at your best level. Um, and one of the other things too is you talking about performance. Um, and that's something I've been kind of going back and forth with too. There's got to be some standard of performance. But I look at the officer that goes out and has some good contacts with some kids or some residents and sees people not in their worst moment and has kind of a good interaction with them. And it's kind of a reminder that, hey, not everybody is bad out there.
Yeah.
Not everybody you deal with is committing a crime or anything like that. And just having those friendly interactions kind of keeps them grounded into, there's good people out there.
I think that's a good reminder. And I do think that that's all a part of mental health, being able to engage with the community in a positive way. And it's not all negative because you do. I think it's negativity is so much easier to focus on than positivity. And that's why they have, these practices of gratitude. There's no practice of negativity. There's no one going out being like, hey, you need to practice how to be more negative, because that's how our brain works, is to focus on the bad things, the negative things, the hard things, instead of the positive things, the joyous things, and I think that that's why there's mental resiliency practices, there's gratitude practices, because you have to train your brain to look for the good because
Mhm.
default default choice is going to be to focus on the negative.
Exactly.
I know that right now, just across the board, one of the biggest challenges is staffing and having the manpower within the organization. And obviously that's from two different perspectives, right? You have the hiring perspective and the recruitment perspective, and then you have retention. Are you seeing a challenge in that space? And do you think that wellness is something that can help?
Yes, we are seeing a challenge in recruitment. Yes, I think a good wellness plan would would help in recruiting. Um, I don't think that's the end all to the recruiting crisis, but I think that's a good part of it.
Yeah.
To where you're going to retain people. And that goes more into retention, where after you've hired them, after a year or so, when they're over the joy of, I'm hired, I'm going out and arresting bad guys. And then the reality of it kind of sets in. If there's a good wellness program in place that can help them get through
Yeah.
that spot, that would definitely help retention.
What do you think is the biggest challenge still, just in wellness in general, in law enforcement? Do you think it's the stigma? Do you think it's funding? What do you think is still the biggest challenge?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the stigma is still going to be the biggest obstacle. Um, one in law enforcement, there's still a lot of military veterans, where that culture is still, I don't want to say encouraged, but there's still that stigma in the military, and when they get out and are law enforcement, that carries over into law enforcement. So I don't think that stigma is ever going to really go away 100%. It's something to work towards, absolutely. And anything we can do to reduce that, we can, but that may always be, I think, the biggest obstacle to that.
And I know that you already shared a lot of really great advice and insights and, how you can create a culture that is accepting of these things, like how we can start making strides and breaking the stigma and making it okay to seek out resources and being proactive and starting early in their career. What words of advice would you give to someone who's younger in their career? Maybe something that you wish
Well,
you would have known or listened to.
I'd need about an hour just for that, I think. But
We'll do a part two of the podcast. It's
the
just the words of wisdom.
yeah, to kind of sum it up, I hope everybody enjoys a long career. I know I have, and you need to start at day one and start with the small things. Build up the habits that, nutrition. Take away the stigma from the counseling. It's accepted. It's, financially have a financial planner or seek some type of advice and plan for the long range. That way you don't end up 20 years down the road and say, what do I do now? I've
Yeah,
either got to continue working or, maybe I don't have enough to send the kids to college. So it might come down to choices like that. So start early on, make small changes that are helpful and just build on those. And keep building on those every year. And it doesn't take much effort to build a habit. What, 30, 60 days, something becomes a habit. Get to the gym a couple times a week, you know, eat a little bit better a couple times a week. To try and do all those changes at once is going to be a failure and it's going to be a big setback. So start at the beginning, make the small steps, and it's a lot easier to build those healthy habits.
I love it. Thank you. And I completely agree. It's like small changes create long lasting impact. And if you can eat the elephant one bite at a time,
Mhm.
then it becomes more sustainable and it's easier to digest than to think that you have to do everything at once. So I really
It,
like those words of wisdom.
yeah, it just becomes too overwhelming. And like I said, you've made no progress after that. So take it slow and just build on it.
I love it. Thank you. I appreciate
I,
your time so much. Thank you for joining me on
I,
today's
I
episode. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Thank you.